UFC 301 Pantoja vs. Erceg is this Saturday, and for each fight, including the prelims, I'm going to compare fighter stats, review their recent fight history, analyze the results for each of my 7 data science prediction models, give a combined weighted prediction of those models, and then give a final prediction which considers both quantitative and qualitative information combined. If you guys are new to the channel, I like to combine statistics with intuition and observation to make educated and logical predictions for fights. And later this week, I'll also upload a video covering promising underdogs and inexpensive favorites to highlight some opportunities for you all. Hopefully you can use these predictions and data to confirm your picks, avoid some mistakes, and find some value bets, or just for entertainment and informative purposes to prepare for UFC 301. Please do me a favor and like and subscribe if you find this interesting, informative, or helpful, as it'll help keep me motivated in creating these videos for you all. I've also added my Patreon information in the description if you want to support me through that for $5 or $10 a month. It's definitely not required, but it would be very much appreciated. Running this data and analysis, each of the prediction models, the fight simulations, charts and graphs, and updating the website takes hours every single day and week, so I'd really appreciate any support that y'all can show. And thank you all for the recent support that you have shown me. I can't believe I'm already at 650 subscribers. It truly means the world to me that I can continue to share my passion for MMA with you all, and we can continue to build this community up together. So let's go ahead and jump right in. For the first fight on this card, we have Alessandro Costa versus Kevin Boras. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Alessandro Costa is 5 feet 4 inches tall with a reach of 67 inches at 28 years old. On the other hand, Kevin Boras is 5 feet 5 inches tall with a reach of 68 inches and is 26 years old. When it comes to striking, Alessandro Costa lands 3.75 strikes per minute at a 46% accuracy. Kevin Boras, on the other hand, lands 5.4 strikes per minute at a 41% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Alessandro Costa lands 0.31 takedowns on average at a 16% accuracy. And when it comes to defense, Alessandro Costa absorbs 3.61 strikes per minute with a 56% striking defense and a 90% takedown defense, whereas Kevin Boras absorbs 6.63 strikes per minute with a 49% striking defense and a 56% takedown defense. Now let's check out Alessandro Costa's recent fight history. Recently, Alessandro Costa is coming off of a loss to this event's main eventer, Steve Erceg, and that was via unanimous decision back in November 11, 2023. Some of the notable opponents that Alessandro Costa has defeated include Jimmy Flick, Carlos Gomez, Juan Andres Luna, Enrique Gonzalez, which was a championship fight, and Jorge Calva Martin, which was also a title fight. Some notable opponents that they've lost to include, of course, Steve Erceg, Amir Albazi, and Ivan Hernandez Flores. Alessandro Costa's total record is 13 wins and 4 losses, and out of those 13 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 6 of them were submissions, and 3 of them were decision victories, which gives him a 77% finishing rate. Now, out of his 4 losses, 2 of them were via KO/TKO, none of them were submissions, and 2 of them were decision losses. Alessandro Costa also has 8 first-round finishes, and recently, he's won 3 out of his 5 recent fights, and he's coming off of a loss. Last thing that I wanted to mention about him was that his most recent win was not too long ago. It was in June 2023. Now let's check out Kevin Boras' recent fight history. Recently, Kevin Boras is coming off of a loss against Joshua Van via unanimous decision, also back in November 11, 2023. Some notable opponents that Kevin Boras has defeated include Victor Diaz and Joseph Vieira da Silva. Kevin Boras' total record is 9 wins and 2 losses, and out of those 9 wins, 8 of them were KO/TKOs, and 1 of them was a decision victory, which gives him an 89% finishing rate. Out of his 2 losses, 1 was a submission and 1 was a decision loss. Kevin Boras also has 5 first-round finishes. He's recently won 4 out of his 5 recent fights. His most recent win was back in August 2023, and his most recent loss was that fight in November 2023, and he's coming off of a loss into this fight. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that data and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observations. Starting with the prediction models, 5 out of 7 of my prediction models lean towards Alessandro Costa, and 2 of them lean towards Kevin Boras. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 70.5% probability for Alessandro Costa. For my final prediction, I give Alessandro Costa a slightly less confident 60% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Kevin Boras has a height advantage of an inch, he's 2 years younger, he has a reach advantage of an inch, and he lands 1.65 more strikes per minute. Now, the reason I'm picking Alessandro Costa is due to the fact that he has a 5% higher striking accuracy, he absorbs 3 less strikes per minute, he has a 8% higher striking defense, and he has a 34% higher takedown defense. Here's the thing, Costa has a good chance of defeating Kevin Boras and using his grappling-heavy style. He's able to take opponents to the mat and work for dominant positions and initiate ground and pound and essentially control the fight to work either for a finish or even get a decision victory over the course of a fight. He should look to pressure Boras with volume striking and mix in those takedown attempts to keep him off balance. He'll have to close the distance here and work in the clinch to negate the height and reach advantage that Boras has. Now, if he can avoid the volume that Boras will throw and those dangerous power shots, then this should be Costa's fight to win. And I could see this one going to the judges for a decision victory. In the next fight, we have Ismael Bonfim versus Vince Pichel. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Ismael Bonfim is 5 feet 7 inches tall with a reach of 71 inches and is 28 years old. On the other hand, Vince Pichel is 5 feet 9 inches tall with a reach of 72 inches and is 41 years old. When it comes to striking, Ismael Bonfim lands 4.91 strikes per minute at a 57% accuracy. Vince Pichel, on the other hand, lands 3.56 strikes per minute at a 47% accuracy. Now, as far as grappling goes, Ismael Bonfim lands 1.11 takedowns on average at a 28% accuracy, while Vince Pichel, on the other hand, lands 3 takedowns on average at a 54% accuracy. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Ismael Bonfim absorbs 2.66 strikes per minute with a 76% striking defense and an 81% takedown defense, whereas Vince Pichel absorbs 2.5 strikes per minute with a 58% striking defense and a 23% takedown defense. Now let's check out Ismael Bonfim's recent fight history. Recently, Ismael Bonfim is coming off of a loss against Benoit Saint-Denis, which was back in July 1st, 2023. Some notable opponents that Ismael Bonfim has defeated include Terrence McKinney and Nariman Abbasov, and some of the opponents that they've lost to include, of course, Benoit Saint-Denis, Renato Moicano, which was a championship fight, Jefferson Lucas, and Adriano Moraes. And in case you were wondering, that fight against Renato Moicano was not in the UFC. That was in Jungle Fight for the featherweight championship. Ismael Bonfim's total record's 19 wins and 4 losses, and out of his 19 wins, 9 of them were KO/TKOs, 4 of them were submissions, and 6 were decision victories, which gives him a 68.5% finishing rate. And out of his 4 losses, all 4 were submissions. Ismael Bonfim also has 6 first-round finishes, and he's recently won 4 out of his 5 recent fights, but he's coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in January 21st, 2023, and his most recent loss was that fight in July 1st, 2023. Now let's check out Vince Pichel's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Mark Madsen via unanimous decision, which was back in April 9, 2022. Some notable opponents that Vince Pichel has defeated include Austin Hubbard, who we just saw, Jim Miller, Roosevelt Roberts, Joaquim Silva, and Damian Brown. He's also lost to Marco Madsen and Rustam Khabilov. Vince Pichel's total record is 14 wins and only 3 losses, and out of his 14 wins, 8 of them were KO/TKOs, none of his wins were via submission, and 6 of them were decision victories, which gives him a 57.2% finishing rate. Out of his 3 losses, 1 was via KO/TKO, 1 was a submission, and the other one was a decision. Vince Pichel also has 2 first-round finishes. He's recently winning 3 out of his 5 recent fights, and he's coming off of a loss into this fight. Lastly, his most recent win was in August 21st, 2021, and his most recent loss was in April 9th, 2022. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observations. 4 out of 7 of my prediction models lean towards Ismael Bonfim, and 3 lean towards Vince Pichel. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 54.9% probability for Vince Pichel. However, for fairly obvious reasons, I'm going to go against the prediction models here and give Ismael Bonfim a 67.9% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Ismael Bonfim is 13 years younger, he lands 1.35 more strikes per minute, he has a 10% higher striking accuracy, he has a 18% higher striking defense, and he has a 58% higher takedown defense. Also, he's a well-rounded fighter that can adapt to different fighting styles while utilizing his aggressive striking and grappling to his advantage. He's a versatile fighter who can mix up his attacks and pose problems for Pichel. He's also shown improvements in his takedown defense, which could neutralize some of the advantages that Pichel is bringing, and Bonfim's aggressive style and pressure could force Pichel to fight at a faster pace than he's normally comfortable with. I believe he'll leverage those things to his advantage and get a KO/TKO finish here. Respect to Pele though, you just can't underestimate him and his power. He's a veteran of the sport, so this one's going to be a very interesting fight. In the next fight, we have Barbosa versus Carate. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Barbosa is 5 feet 5 inches tall with a reach of 66 inches and is 31 years old. And on the other hand, Carate is 5 feet 8 inches tall with a reach of 71 inches and is 25 years old. Now, before we get into their fighting stats, I wanted to let you all know that both fighters' stats come from only one fight each. So when it comes to striking, Barbosa lands 0.87 strikes per minute at a 50% accuracy. Carate, on the other hand, lands 12.27 strikes per minute at a 45% accuracy. Now again, these are lopsided because it's only one fight each. As far as grappling goes, Barbosa lands 3.27 takedowns on average with a pretty good accuracy, while Carate, on the other hand, lands 1 takedown on average with a 50% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Barbosa absorbs 0.65 strikes per minute with a 66% striking defense, whereas Carate absorbs 11.2 strikes per minute with a 42% striking defense and a pretty decent takedown defense as well. Now let's check out Barbosa's recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of a win against Rain Guerrero via submission back in September 5th, 2023. Some notable opponents that Barbosa has defeated include Jessica Middleton, Mariana Piccolo, Karine Silva, and Ana Paula. And some of the opponents that she's lost to include Jenna Bishop and Josia Nunes. Barbosa's total record 6 wins and 2 losses, and out of her 6 wins, 3 were submissions and 3 were decisions, which gives her a 50% finish rate. Out of her 2 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO and the other one was a decision. She also has 3 first-round finishes. She's recently won 3 out of her last 5 fights, and she's currently on a streak of 3 wins. Her most recent win was on September 5th, 2023, and her most recent loss was on November 12th, 2021. Now let's go ahead and talk about Carate's recent fight history and her career. She's coming off of a win against Carly Judas via split decision back in September 26, 2023. Her total record's 5 wins and 0 losses. Out of her 5 wins, 2 of them were KO/TKOs and 3 were decision victories, which gives her a 40% finish rate. She also has 2 first-round finishes. She's recently won 4 out of her 5 recent fights, and she's currently on a 3-fight win streak as well. And lastly, her most recent win was back in September 26, 2023, not very long ago. Unfortunately, I couldn't run these fighters through my prediction models because of the debuts. However, the odd probabilities are giving Barbosa a 66.4% probability of victory. And I tend to agree with that range because Barbosa has a 5% higher striking accuracy. She absorbs less strikes per minute and has a better striking defense. She also lands more takedowns on average with higher accuracy. So she's coming off of 3 wins, and her last loss was all the way back in 2021. She has a significant advantage on the ground, and she needs to lean on her wrestling and jiu-jitsu in order to win this fight because she will not be able to outbox Ernesta. She also has a couple more professional fights than Ernesta does, which kind of gives her an advantage when it comes to experience, so I think I'm leaning towards her in this fight. In the next fight, we have Mauricio Ruffy versus Jamie Malarkey. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Mauricio Ruffy is 6 feet tall with a reach of 75 inches and is 27 years old. And on the other hand, Jamie Malarkey is 6 feet tall with a reach of 74 inches at 29 years old. Before we get into the fighting stats, I want to let you guys know that Mauricio Ruffy's stats come from only one fight. So when it comes to striking, Mauricio Ruffy lands 4.75 strikes per minute at a 58% accuracy. Jamie Malarkey, on the other hand, lands 4.46 strikes per minute at a 46% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Jamie Malarkey lands 2.42 takedowns on average at a 34% accuracy. And when it comes to defense, Mauricio Ruffy absorbs 4.07 strikes per minute with a 58% striking defense and a pretty decent takedown defense, whereas Jamie Malarkey absorbs 4.49 strikes per minute with a 54% striking defense and a 76% takedown defense. Now let's check out Mauricio Ruffy's recent fight history. He's coming off of a win against Raymond Magomedalayev via KO/TKO back in October 3rd, 2023. Now, out of his 9 wins, all 9 were KO/TKOs, which gives him a 100% finish rate. And out of his 1 loss, it was a KO/TKO as well. Mauricio Ruffy also has 7 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 4 out of his 5 recent fights, and he's currently on a win streak of 4 wins. His most recent win was on October 3rd, 2023, and his most recent loss was all the way back in November 2019. Now let's check out Jamie Malarkey's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Nasrat Haqparast via KO/TKO, which was back in December 9th, 2023. Some notable opponents that Jamie Malarkey has defeated include John Makdessi, Francisco Prado, Michael Johnson, Devontae Smith, and Kama Worthy. And some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include, of course, Nasrat Haqparast, Muhammad Naimov, Jalen Turner, Fares Zaim, and Brad Riddell. Jamie Malarkey's total record is 17 wins and 7 losses, and out of those 17 wins, 9 of them were KO/TKOs, 3 of them were submissions, 5 of them were decision victories, which gives him a 70.6% finishing rate. Now, out of his 7 losses, 5 of them were via KO/TKO, and the other 2 were decisions. Jamie Malarkey also has 6 first-round finishes, and recently he's winning 3 out of his last 5 fights. However, he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was on September 9th, 2023, and his most recent loss was back in December 23, as we discussed. Unfortunately, I couldn't run these fighters through my prediction models because of the debut. However, the odd probabilities are giving Mauricio Ruffy a 60.4% probability of victory. I agree with that because Mauricio Ruffy is 2 years younger, he has a reach advantage of 1 inch, he lands a little bit more strikes per minute with a higher striking accuracy, he also absorbs a little bit less strikes per minute, and he has a slightly higher striking defense as well. But more important than the stats that we see on paper, he's coming off of a 4-fight win streak, he's finished all 9 of his fights, and he's a KO artist that also has respectable counter-wrestling ability. That power, paired with Malarkey having kind of a weak chin, will likely result in trouble for Malarkey in this fight. Malarkey's a good fighter until you land on him, and then it's pretty much downhill. The Naimov fight is a great example of that. Nasrat Haqparast was able to drop him too, and respectfully, Haqparast is not known for his knockout power. Ruffy gets the win in this one, and I see him pulling off a KO/TKO, most likely in the first round, since 70% of his finishes came within that first round. In case you guys are hunting for any prop bets, I wanted to let you guys know that. You guys know I like to help y'all out and highlight some value anywhere I can. For the next fight, we have Joaquim Silva versus Drakkar Klose. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Joaquim Silva is 5 feet 7 inches tall with a reach of 69 inches and is 35 years old. On the other hand, Drakkar Klose is 5 feet 8 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches and is 36 years old. When it comes to striking, Joaquim Silva lands 3.61 strikes per minute at a 41% accuracy. Drakkar Klose, on the other hand, lands 4.33 strikes per minute at a 55% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Joaquim Silva lands 0.45 takedowns on average at a 60% accuracy, while Drakkar Klose, on the other hand, lands 1.78 takedowns on average, but at a 30% accuracy. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Joaquim Silva absorbs 4.51 strikes per minute with a 54% striking defense and a 64% takedown defense, whereas Drakkar Klose absorbs 3.4 strikes per minute with a 52% striking defense and a 68% takedown defense. Now let's check out Joaquim Silva's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Clay Guida, which was by unanimous decision back in December 2, 2023. Some of the notable opponents that Joaquim Silva has defeated include Jesse Ronson, Jared Gordon, Reza Madadi, and Andrew Hallbrook. And some of the notable opponents that they've lost to include Arman Sarukian, Ricky Glenn, Nasrat Haqparast, and Vince Piquel. Joaquim Silva's total record is 13 wins and 5 losses, and out of his 13 wins, 7 were KO/TKOs, 3 were submissions, and 3 were decision victories, which is a 77% finishing rate. Out of his 5 losses, 3 were via KO/TKO, 1 was a decision, and 1 was a submission. Joaquim Silva also has 8 first-round finishes. He's recently won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and like I said, he's coming off of a win into this fight, so he has a little bit of momentum. Now let's check out Drakkar Klose's recent fight history. He's recently coming off a win against Joe Solecki via KO/TKO back in December 2nd, 2023. Some of the notable opponents that Drakkar Klose has defeated include Rafa Garcia, Brandon Jenkins, Christos Giagos, and Bobby Green. And some of the notable opponents that they've lost to include Benil Dariush and David Tamar. Drakkar Klose's total record is 14 wins and 2 losses, and out of his 14 wins, 6 of them were KO/TKOs and 8 of them were decision victories, which gives him a 43% finish rate. Out of his 2 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO and the other was a decision loss. He also has 2 first-round finishes. He's recently won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he's currently on a 3-fight win streak. His most recent win was that win back in December 2nd, 2023, and his most recent loss was all the way back in March 7th, 2020. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observations. Only 2 out of 7 of my prediction models lean towards Joaquim Silva, and the other 5 lean towards Drakkar Klose. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 59% probability for Drakkar Klose. For my final prediction, I give Drakkar Klose a more confident 63% probability of victory due to the fact that he has a height advantage of an inch, he has a reach advantage of an inch, he lands 0.72 more strikes per minute, he has a 14% higher striking accuracy, he absorbs 1.11 less strikes per minute, he lands 1.33 more takedowns on average, he has a 4% higher takedown defense. But let's get away from statistics for a quick second and let's talk strategy. Klose needs to keep this fight standing and avoid being taken down. His ability to control the distance will be absolutely crucial in preventing Silva from getting this fight to the mat. I could see him landing some clean and powerful shots from the outside and avoiding being cornered. He has the reach advantage, so he'll likely land from the outside as well. If Klose can stay disciplined and use his footwork to control the distance, he's going to win this fight. He's also carrying some momentum on his side as he's coming off of 3 wins back-to-back, and out of his 10 UFC fights, he's won 8 of them, which is pretty impressive. 43% of his wins have came via KO/TKO, so you could make the argument that he possibly could finish Silva, and there's probably some decent risk to reward value there, or it may go the distance, which most likely that's what's going to end up happening, as 57% of his wins have gone the distance in the past. Regardless, I think Klose gets it done in this fight. For the next fight, we have Gene Silva versus William Gomez. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Gene Silva is 5 feet 6 inches tall with a reach of 69 inches and is 27 years old. On the other hand, William Gomez is 6 feet tall with a reach of 73 inches and is 26 years old. When it comes to striking, Gene Silva lands 5.83 strikes per minute at a 52% accuracy. William Gomez, on the other hand, lands 2.62 strikes per minute at a 46% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Gene Silva lands 1.56 takedowns on average at a 50% accuracy, while William Gomez, on the other hand, lands 1.06 takedowns on average at a 60% accuracy. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Gene Silva absorbs 4.27 strikes per minute with a 57% striking defense and a pretty good takedown defense as well, whereas William Gomez absorbs 1.49 strikes per minute with a 75% striking defense and an 81% takedown defense. Now let's check out Gene Silva's recent fight history. Recently, Gene Silva is coming off of a win against Weston Wilson via KO/TKO back in January 13, 2023. Now, his total record is 12 wins and 2 losses, and out of those 12 wins, 9 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 of them were submissions, and 1 of them was a decision victory, which gives him a pretty high 92% finishing rate. Out of his 2 losses, both of them were decisions. Gene Silva also has 9 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won all 5 out of his last 5 fights, and he's currently on a 9-fight winning streak. Gene Silva's most recent win was back in January 2024. His most recent loss was all the way back on April 2018. Now let's check out William Gomez's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Yanis Gamori via KO/TKO back in September 2nd, 2023. His total record is 13 wins and 2 losses, and out of his 13 wins, 7 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 was a submission, and the remaining 5 were decisions, which gives him a 62% finish rate. Now, out of his 2 losses, 1 was a submission and the other was a decision. William Gomez also has 2 first-round finishes. He's recently won all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he's currently on a 12-fight win streak. His most recent win was back in September 2023. His most recent loss was all the way back in November 2016. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observations. All 7 of my prediction models lean towards Gene Silva to win, and none are pointing towards William Gomez to win. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 60.3% probability for Gene Silva. For my final prediction, I gave Gene Silva a very slightly less confident 60% even probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that William Gomez has a height advantage of 5 inches. He's a year younger, he has a reach advantage of 4 inches, he absorbs 2.78 less strikes per minute, he has a 18% higher striking defense, and has a 10% higher takedown accuracy. I probably could have knocked that down a little bit more now that I'm looking back at it, but the decision remains the same. Y'all get the point. The reason I'm picking Gene Silva is due to the fact that Gene Silva lands 3.21 more strikes per minute, he has a 6% higher striking accuracy, and he lands a little bit more takedowns on average as well, with a much better takedown defense. Now, Aside from stats, I think Silva is just ever so slightly better than Gomez in this fight, and his skills will likely neutralize any route that Gomez attempts to take to try to win. Now, Gomez is a respectable striker with a dangerous striking style that Silva definitely needs to be cautious of coming into this fight, but Silva should still have the upper hand here. He's coming off of a 9-fight win streak, which extends all the way back to 2018 like we said, and he's finished 8 of those 9 fights. He's also won 86% of his total fights, and 75% of those wins have actually been via KO/TKO. He's finished 92% of the fights that he's won, of which 64% came within the very first round. Bottom line, I think Silva gets it done here, and it's probably going to go to the judges. For the next fight, we have Elvis Brener versus Mike Tybeck Orai. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Elvis Brener is 5 feet 9 inches tall with a reach of 72 inches and is 26 years old. On the other hand, Orai is 5 feet 9 inches tall with a reach of 74 inches and is 26 years old as well. Now, before getting into these fight stats, I want to let you guys know that Orai's stats come from only one fight. So, when it comes to striking, Elvis Brener lands 4.64 strikes per minute at a 46% accuracy. Orai, on the other hand, lands 0.87 strikes per minute at a 40% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Elvis Brener lands 0.93 takedowns on average at a 20% accuracy, and Orai, on the other hand, lands 11.41 takedowns on average at a 70% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Elvis Brener absorbs 5.05 strikes per minute with a 55% striking defense and an 85% takedown defense, whereas Orai absorbs 1.52 strikes per minute with a 48% striking defense, and he doesn't have any takedown defense recorded. Now let's check out Elvis Brener's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Kainan Khrushchevsky via KO/TKO, which was back in November 4th, 2023. He has a total record of 16 wins and only 3 losses, and out of his 16 wins, 11 were submissions, 2 were decision victories, and 3 were KO/TKOs, which gives him a total of an 88% finishing rate. Out of his 3 losses, all 3 were decisions. Elvis Brener also has 9 first-round finishes, and he's recently won all 5 of his 5 last fights with a current streak of 5 wins. Elvis Brener's most recent win was back in November 2023, and his most recent loss was all the way back in October 2020. Now let's check out Orai's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Uros Medic via submission back in November 2023. Now, his total record is 12 wins and only 1 loss, and out of his 12 wins, 6 of them were KO/TKOs, 5 were submissions, and only 1 was a decision victory, which gives him a pretty good 92% finishing rate. Out of his 1 loss, it was a decision loss. Orai also has 7 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won all 5 of his 5 last fights, and he has a current streak of 7 wins. His most recent win was in November 18, 2023, and his most recent loss was also back in 2020, and that was in the month of December. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observations. 1 out of 7 of my prediction models lean towards Elvis Brener, and 6 lean towards Orai. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 59.2% probability for Orai. For my final prediction, I give him a slightly more confident 63% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Orai has a reach advantage of 2 inches, he absorbs less strikes per minute, he lands more takedowns on average, and he has a better takedown accuracy. He's also on a 7-fight win streak, which gives him a lot of momentum coming into this fight, and that extends all the way back to 2021 like we talked about. He's also finished 92% of the fights that he's won, 50% of which were in the very first round, and he's won 86% of his total fights. For his UFC debut, he defeated Uros Medic via submission in round 2, but this fight will be a true test for him as the competition continues to increase as he progresses in his professional fighting career. I think based on his momentum, his finishing power, and his ability to historically win tough fights will contribute to his chances of getting a victory in this fight. If I had to pick how I think he's going to win, I'd say this one will go to the judges instead of him getting a KO/TKO victory because of the skills that Brener will bring to the table in this matchup. In the next fight, we have Carolina Kowalkiewicz versus Yasmin Lucindo. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Carolina is 5 feet 3 inches tall with a reach of 64 inches at 38 years old. On the other hand, Yasmin Lucindo is also 5 feet 3 inches tall with a slightly longer reach of 66 inches, and is much younger at 22 years old. When it comes to striking, Carolina lands 5.92 strikes per minute at a 43% accuracy. Yasmin Lucindo, on the other hand, lands 3.33 strikes per minute at a lower 39% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Carolina lands 0.36 takedowns on average at a low 26% accuracy, whereas Yasmin Lucindo has better takedown stats, landing 2.33 takedowns on average at a much higher 66% accuracy. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Carolina absorbs 5.55 strikes per minute with a 59% striking defense and a 74% takedown defense, whereas Yasmin Lucindo absorbs 3.23 strikes per minute with a better 67% striking defense and a worse 66% takedown defense. Now let's check out Carolina's recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of a win against Diana Belbita via unanimous decision back in October 7, 2023. Her total record is 16 wins and 7 losses, and out of her 16 wins, 1 was a KO/TKO, 3 were submissions, and 12 were decision victories, which gives her a very low 25% finishing rate. Out of her 7 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, 2 were submissions, and 4 were decision losses. Carolina also has 3 first-round finishes, and recently she's won 4 out of her last 5 fights with a current streak of 4 wins. Carolina's most recent win was back in October 2023, like we said, and her most recent loss was back in August 2021. Now let's check out Yasmin Lucindo's recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of a win against Polyana Viena via submission back in August 12, 2023. Her total record is 15 wins and 5 losses, and out of her 15 wins, 8 were KO/TKOs, 3 were submissions, and the remaining 4 were decision victories, which gives her a respectable 73% finishing rate. Out of her 5 losses, 1 was via KO/TKO, 2 were submissions, and the other 2 were decision losses. Yasmin Lucindo also has 3 first-round finishes. Recently, she's won 4 out of her last 5 fights, and she's currently on a streak of 2 wins. Her most recent win was back in August 12, 2023, and her most recent loss was about 2 years ago back in August 2022. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final picks that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observation as well. Only 1 out of 7 of my prediction models lean towards Carolina, and the other 6 lean towards Yasmin Lucindo. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 57% probability for Yasmin Lucindo. Now for my final prediction, I give her a more confident 67% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Yasmin Lucindo is 16 years younger. She has a 2-inch reach advantage, she absorbs 2.3 less strikes per minute, she has a 9% higher striking defense, she lands almost 2 more takedowns on average, she has a 40% higher takedown accuracy, and she lands a little bit more submissions on average as well. She has a few things going for her in this fight. She's the far younger fighter who's coming off of 2 straight wins, and she's also won 2 out of her 3 UFC fights that she's fought in. Also, she's won 4 out of her last 5 fights. She's finished 73% of the fights, and that's distributed pretty evenly across different rounds of each of the fights, so she can go the distance or she can finish it within the first round. Now, it's also been a while since she's had her last loss, almost 2 years ago like we said, and she's won 75% of the fights that she's ever fought in. Her style will be more energetic, and she'll likely have a speed and stamina advantage over the nearly 40-year-old Carolina. Bottom line, Lucindo gets it done. I think she gets a decision victory in this fight. In the next fight, we have Jack Shore versus Joanderson Breedo. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Jack Shore is 5 feet 7 inches tall with reach of 71 inches and is 29 years old. On the other hand, Joanderson Breedo is also 5 feet 7 inches tall with a slightly longer reach at 72 inches, but is also 29 years old. Now, when it comes to striking, Jack Shore lands 3.84 strikes per minute at a 58% accuracy. Joanderson Breedo, on the other hand, lands 3.32 strikes per minute at a 51% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Jack Shore lands 3.42 takedowns on average at a 40% accuracy, while Joanderson Breedo lands 3.4 takedowns on average at a 75% accuracy. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Jack Shore absorbs 2.2 strikes per minute with a 57% striking defense and a 79% takedown defense, whereas Joanderson Breedo absorbs 2.62 strikes per minute with a 47% striking defense and a 50% takedown defense. Now let's check out Jack Shore's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Makwan Amirkhani via submission back in March 18th, 2023. He has a total record of 17 wins and only 1 loss, and out of his 17 wins, 4 of them were via KO/TKO, 9 were via submission, and 4 were decision victories, which gives him a pretty respectable 77% finishing rate. His one and only loss was a submission loss, but he's also had 6 first-round finishes. He's recently won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he's currently coming off of a win. And the last thing that I wanted to mention for him is that his one loss was all the way back in July 16, 2022, so it's been about 2 years. Now let's check out Joanderson Breedo's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Jonathan Pierce via submission back in November 18, 2023. His total record is 16 wins and only 3 losses, and out of his 16 wins, 7 of them were KO/TKOs, 7 were submissions, and 2 were decision victories, which gives him an 88% finishing rate. Out of his 3 losses, 1 was KO/TKO, the other one was a submission, and the last one was a decision. He also has 10 first-round finishes. He's recently won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he's currently on a 4-fight win streak. His most recent win was back in November 23, and his most recent loss was back in January 2022. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observation as well. All 7 of my prediction models lean towards Jack Shore, and none of them lean towards Joanderson Breedo. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 68% probability for Jack Shore. Now for my final prediction, I give him a much less confident 53% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Joanderson Breedo has a slight reach advantage, he has a much higher takedown accuracy, and he lands a little bit more submissions on average. Now the reason I am picking Jack Shore is due to the fact that he lands slightly more strikes per minute, he has a better striking accuracy, he absorbs less strikes per minute, he has a 10% higher striking defense, and he lands a little bit more takedowns on average as well, with a much better takedown defense. Here's the thing, Jack Shore's an underdog coming into this fight, but I do think that he can get it done because he's a talented grappler with a good wrestling base. He's won 94% of his total fights, and he's finished 76% of his wins throughout different rounds. Most of his finishes come within the first 2 rounds, but he's also gotten 4 third-round finishes. He's won 6 out of 7 of his UFC fights as well. I respect Breedo's recent form and his finishing ability, which is why I'm giving the underdog a narrow probability of victory, but I think he can avoid Breedo's power shots and negate some of those advantages that he has in this fight, especially with his grappling. I think Shore gets a decision victory in this fight. In the next fight, we have Paul Craig versus Caio Barralo. Let's review their stats. Paul Craig is 6 feet 3 inches tall with a reach of 76 inches and is 36 years old. On the other hand, Caio Barralo is 5 feet 9 inches tall with a reach of 75 inches and is 31 years old. When it comes to striking, Paul Craig lands 2.42 strikes per minute at a 46% accuracy. Caio Barralo, on the other hand, lands 2.73 strikes per minute at a 58% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Paul Craig lands 1.76 takedowns on average at a 22% accuracy, while Caio Barralo lands 2.16 takedowns on average at a 63% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Paul Craig absorbs 2.86 strikes per minute with a 45% striking defense and a 37% takedown defense, whereas Caio Barralo absorbs 1.98 strikes per minute with a 60% striking defense and a 57% takedown defense. Now let's check out Paul Craig's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Brendan Allen via submission back in November 18, 2023. Some of the notable opponents that Paul Craig has defeated include Andre Muniz, Nikita Krylov, Jamal Hill, Mauricio Rua, and Gadzimurad Antigulov. Some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Johnny Walker, Volkan Ozdemir, Alonzo Manfield, and Jimmy Krug. Paul Craig's total record is 17 wins and 7 losses, and out of his 17 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 13 were submissions, and he has no decision victories, which gives him a 100% finish rate. Out of his 7 losses, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 of them were submissions, and 1 of them was a decision loss. He also has 11 first-round finishes, but he's recently only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in July 2023, and his most recent loss was back in November 2023. Now let's check out Caio Barralo's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Abus Magomedov via unanimous decision back in November 4th, 2023. Some of the notable opponents that he's defeated include Michael Olajejek, Mahmoud Muradov, Armen Petrosian, and Gadzi Omargadziev. His total record is 15 wins and only 1 loss, and out of his 15 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 4 of them were submissions, and 7 were decision victories. His only loss was a decision loss. Caio Barralo also has 6 first-round finishes. He's recently won 5 out of his last 5 fights, and he currently has a win streak of 12 wins. His most recent win was back in November 2023, and his most recent loss was all the way 9 years ago in July 18, 2015. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observation as well. None of my models are leaning towards Paul Craig, and 7 are leaning towards Caio Barralo. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 62% probability for Caio Barralo. For my final prediction, I give him a more confident 72% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Caio Barralo is 5 years younger, he lands 0.31 more strikes per minute, he has a higher striking accuracy, he absorbs less strikes per minute, he has a 15% higher striking defense, he lands a little bit more takedowns on average, and he has a much better takedown accuracy, and has a 20% higher takedown defense. He's on an insane 12-fight win streak that goes all the way back to 2018. He's won 88% of his total fights. He's finished about half of them. He's won all of his UFC fights and his 2 Dana White Contender Series fights as well. He's defeated the likes of Abus Magomedov, Michael Olajejek, Mahmoud Muradov, and Armen Petrosian. I believe his striking skills will pose a big problem for Craig, not to mention his grappling skills are also on point. Barralo should win this fight however he wants, but most likely it's going to be by decision. I feel kind of bad for Paul Craig. I know a lot of people like him and want to see him win, but when watching both of their fights, I can't help but feel that they're just on different levels. Even performance-wise, take a look at Paul Craig's last 5 fights compared to Barralo's. Look at the difference in their fight IQ or even their stats. Barralo will likely get the win here, and if you want a fight to add as a parlay, maybe consider this one if you feel the same way about Barralo as I do. In the next fight, we have Michael Pereira versus Pteria. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Michael Pereira is 6 feet 1 inch tall with a reach of 73 inches and is 30 years old. And on the other hand, Pteria is 6 feet 3 inches tall with a reach of 75 inches and is 27 years old. When it comes to striking, Michael Pereira lands 5.15 strikes per minute at a 54% accuracy. Pteria, on the other hand, lands 5.19 strikes per minute at a 50% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Michael Pereira lands 1.55 takedowns on average at a 55% accuracy, and when it comes to defense, Michael Pereira absorbs 3.71 strikes per minute at a 58% striking defense and a 94% takedown defense, whereas Pteria absorbs 5.01 strikes per minute with a 51% striking defense and a 57% takedown defense. Now let's check out Michael Pereira's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Michael Olajejek via submission back in March 9, 2024. Some of the notable opponents that he's defeated include Andre Petrosky, Santiago Ponzinibbio, Andre Fialho, and Nico Price. And some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Diego Sanchez, Tristan Connolly, and a loss to Dusko Todorovic, which was a title fight. Now, Michael Pereira has a total record of 30 wins and 10 losses, and out of his 30 wins, 11 of them were KO/TKOs, 8 of them were submissions, and 11 of them were decision victories, which gives him a 63.4% finish rate. Out of his 11 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, 1 was a submission loss, and the other 8 were decision losses. Michael Pereira also has 14 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he's currently on a 7-fight win streak. His most recent win was pretty recent. It was back in March 9, 2024, and his recent loss was all the way back in February 15, 2020. Now let's check out Pteria's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Robert Brejčak via unanimous decision, which was back in February 10, 2024. His total record is 21 wins and 5 losses, and out of his 21 wins, 6 of them were submission victories and 5 were decision victories, and the other 10 were KO/TKO victories, which gives him a 76% finish rate. Now, out of his 5 losses, 4 of them were KO/TKOs and 1 was a decision loss. He also has 15 first-round finishes. He's recently only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he's currently coming off of a win here. His most recent win was back in February 10, 2024, not too long ago, and his most recent loss was on December 2nd, 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observation as well. 6 out of 7 of my prediction models lean towards Michael Pereira and only 1 leans towards Pteria. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 60% probability for Michael Pereira. Now for my final prediction, with all things researched, I give Michael Pereira a more confident 72% probability of victory, as due to the fact that he has a better striking accuracy, he absorbs less strikes per minute, he has a better striking defense, and he has a much higher takedown defense. I'm going to be honest, Pereira is going to get a KO/TKO in this fight. He has a flashy and unorthodox fighting style that only seems to get better over time along with his confidence. He's pretty well-rounded too, with a good split between his methods of victory being KO/TKOs, a decision, or a submission, which proves that he can handle fights in different ways, however he wants, and that only adds to his adaptability as a fighter. Most of his losses have been decisions, and he's only been finished twice. He's also on a 7-fight win streak. He's won 8 out of his 10 UFC fights, and he's defeated guys like Andre Fialho, Andre Petrosky, Santiago Ponzinibbio, and Michael Olajaychik. He's lost a couple of times when it mattered, though, like title fights against Dusko Todorovic and Ismael de Jesus. But again, those were all the way back in 2018 and 2016. They're probably irrelevant losses to today. So you get my point. Pereira's going to land some powerful shots here. He's going to make them flashy. He's going to rile the crowd up. And that's eventually going to connect against Pteria, and eventually I see him getting dropped. In the next fight, we have Anthony Smith versus Vitor Petrino. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Anthony Smith is 6 feet 4 inches tall with a reach of 76 inches and is 35 years old. On the other hand, Vitor Petrino is 6 feet 2 inches tall with a reach of 77 inches and is 26 years old. When it comes to striking, Anthony Smith lands 3.21 strikes per minute at a 48% accuracy. Vitor Petrino, on the other hand, lands 2.74 strikes per minute at a 45% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Anthony Smith lands 0.49 takedowns on average with a 26% accuracy, while Vitor Petrino, on the other hand, lands 3.86 takedowns on average with a much higher 68% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Anthony Smith absorbs 4.47 strikes per minute with a 46% striking defense and a 48% takedown defense, whereas Vitor Petrino absorbs 2.49 strikes per minute with a 45% striking defense and a 71% takedown defense. Now let's check out Anthony Smith's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Khalil Roundtree Jr. via KO/TKO, which was back in December 9th, 2023. Some of the notable opponents that Anthony Smith has defeated include Ryan Spann, Jimmy Crute, Devin Clark, and Alexander Gustafsson. Some of the notable opponents that they've lost to include Johnny Walker, Magomed Ankalaev, Alexander Rakic, and Glover Teixeira. Anthony Smith's total record is 36 wins and 19 losses. Now, out of his 36 wins, 19 of them were KO/TKOs, 14 of them were submissions, and only 3 were decision victories, which gives him a respectable 89.2% finish rate. Out of his 19 losses, 11 were via KO/TKO, 4 were submissions, and the other 4 were decision losses. He's also had 19 first-round finishes, but recently he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in August 2023. His most recent loss was back in December 2023. Now let's take a look at Vitor Petrino's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Tyson Pedro via unanimous decision back in March 2024. His total record is 11 wins and no losses, and out of his 11 wins, 7 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 was a submission, and 3 were decision victories, which gives him a 73% finishing rate. So, he also has 4 first-round finishes, and recently he's won, of course, all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he's on an 11-fight win streak. He's just recently coming off of a win back in March 2024. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observation as well. None of my prediction models lean towards Anthony Smith, and all 7 are leaning towards Vitor Petrino. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 70.1% probability of victory for Vitor Petrino. Now for my final prediction, with all things considered, I give Vitor Petrino a more confident 76% probability of victory, as due to the fact that Vitor Petrino is 9 years younger, he has a reach advantage of 1 inch, he absorbs about 2 less strikes per minute, he lands 3.37 more takedowns on average, he has a 42% higher takedown accuracy, He has a 23% higher takedown defense, and he lands a little bit more submissions on average. Petrino's undefeated, and he's finished 73% of his fights, mostly by KO/TKO finish. He's won 4 fights in the UFC and his Dana White Contender Series fight as well. He's beaten some really good competition in the division and is coming off of a win from just 2 months ago against Tyson Pedro. I respect Anthony Smith a lot. He's a veteran fighter and a people's favorite. He's contributed a lot to MMA, so shout out to him. But with all due respect, Petrino will most likely get the KO/TKO victory here. For the next fight, we have our co-main event and one of the fights that I'm most excited for. We have Jonathan Martinez versus the return of Jose Aldo, the legend. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Jonathan Martinez is 5 feet 7 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches and is 30 years old. On the other hand, Jose Aldo is 5 feet 6 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches and is 37 years old. When it comes to striking, Jonathan Martinez lands 4.64 strikes per minute at a 50% accuracy. Jose Aldo, on the other hand, lands 3.57 strikes per minute at a 46% striking accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Jonathan Martinez lands only 0.44 takedowns on average, and that's at a 41% accuracy, while Jose Aldo lands 0.49 takedowns on average at a 54% accuracy. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Jonathan Martinez absorbs 3.76 strikes per minute with a 58% striking defense and a 69% takedown defense, whereas Jose Aldo absorbs 3.74 strikes per minute with a 60% striking defense and a 91% takedown defense. Now let's check out Jonathan Martinez's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Adrian Yanez via KO/TKO back in October 2023. Some of the notable opponents that he has defeated include Said Nurmagomedov, Cub Swanson, Vince Morales, and Alejandro Perez. And some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Davey Grant, Andre Ewell, and Matt Schnell. Now, Jonathan Martinez's total record is 19 wins and only 3 losses. And out of his 19 wins, 9 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 of them were submissions, and 8 of them were decision victories, which gives him a 58% finish rate. Now, out of his 4 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, and 2 of them were decision losses. Jonathan Martinez also has 3 first-round finishes, recently winning 5 of his 5 fights, with a current streak of 6 wins in a row. His most recent win was back in October 2023. His most recent loss was all the way back in March 2021. Now let's check out Jose Aldo's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Murad Valishvili via unanimous decision back in August 2022. Some notable opponents that Jose Aldo has defeated include Rob Font, Pedro Munoz, Marlon Vera, Renato Moicano, and Jeremy Stevens. Some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Peter Yan, which was a championship fight, Marlon Moraes, Alexander Volkanovski, and Max Holloway, which was also a championship fight. Jose Aldo's total record is 31 wins and only 8 losses. Out of his 31 wins, 17 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 of them was a submission, and 13 were decision victories, which gives him a 58% finishing rate. Out of his 8 losses, 4 were KO/TKOs, 1 was a submission, and 3 were decision losses. Now, he also has 12 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss in this fight, and he's stepping in after a while. He retired, he's coming back, but he's one of those experienced fighters that you just can't count out. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observation as well. All 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Jonathan Martinez, and none of them, unfortunately, are leaning towards Jose Aldo. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 65.5% probability for Jonathan Martinez. Now, for my final prediction, after doing a bunch of research, is that I also unfortunately lean towards Jonathan Martinez, and I give him a less confident 60% probability of victory, and I had to knock it down some out of respect for Jose Aldo's career and what he's capable of. Now, statistically, Jose Aldo lands a little bit more takedowns on average. He has a slightly better takedown accuracy. He has a 22% higher takedown defense, and he absorbs a little bit less strikes per minute as well. Now, the reason I'm picking Jonathan Martinez is due to the fact that he has a little bit of a height advantage. He's 7 years younger. He lands more strikes per minute and at a higher striking accuracy as well. The truth is, he's just been more active, obviously, since Aldo's coming off of retirement here, but still, he's also younger. The difference between 37 and 30 is huge, especially in the context of MMA. His grappling stats are fairly similar to Aldo's, but Aldo has the advantage there. but Martinez's striking stats are more favorable. Aldo's coming off of that loss to Murad Dvalishvili, whereas Martinez is coming off of a 6-fight winning streak. Martinez also has won 83% of his total fights, finishing a little more than half of them at 58%, and he has finishing power as well. I have a deep appreciation for Jose Aldo and his absolutely stacked resume in MMA. He's also a very down-to-earth and humble person if you've heard any of his interviews, and he's very appreciative. He's honestly a great guy. If I was making an emotional pick, I'd absolutely go for Jose Aldo. But logically, Martinez has advantages that should make this fight lean in his favor ever so slightly. I know a lot of people would love to see Aldo win, including me, especially in Brazil, and low-key between us, I hope that he's able to pull off this upset, but logically, it'll be a decision victory for Martinez after a grueling test that Aldo will inevitably put him through. In the next fight, we have our main event, Alexander Pantoja versus Steve Erceg. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Alexander Pantoja is 5 feet 5 inches tall with a reach of 67 inches and is 34 years old. And on the other hand, Steve Erceg is 5 feet 7 inches tall with a reach of 68 inches and is 28 years old. When it comes to striking, Alexander Pantoja lands 4.32 strikes per minute at a 49% accuracy. Steve Erceg, on the other hand, lands 4.57 strikes per minute at a 48% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Alexander Pantoja lands 2.2 takedowns on average at a 48% accuracy, while Steve Erceg, on the other hand, lands 1.69 takedowns at a 30% accuracy. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Alexander Pantoja absorbs 3.9 strikes per minute with a 50% striking defense and a 67% takedown defense, whereas Steve Erceg absorbs 3.64 strikes per minute with a 55% striking defense and a 77% takedown defense. Now let's check out Alexander Pantoja's recent fight history. Recently, Alexander Pantoja is coming off of a win against Brandon Royval via unanimous decision back in December 16, 2023. Some notable opponents that Alexander Pantoja has defeated include Brandon Moreno, which was a championship fight, Alex Perez, Brandon Royval, and Manel Cape. And some of the notable opponents that he's lost to include Askar Askarov, Davison Figueiredo, Dustin Ortiz, Jussier Formega, and William Viana. Alexander Pantoja's total record is 27 wins and 5 losses, and out of his 27 wins, 8 were KO/TKOs, 10 were submissions, and 9 were decision victories, which gives him a 67% finishing rate. Out of his 5 losses, all 5 were decisions. Alexander Pantoja also has 10 first-round finishes, and recently he's won all 5 of his 5 fights with a current streak of 5 wins. His most recent win was in December 16, 2023, and his most recent loss was 4 years ago on July 18, 2020. Now let's check out Steve Erceg's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Matt Schnell via KO/TKO, which was back in March 2nd, 2024. Some notable opponents that Steve Erceg has defeated include Alessandro Costa, David Vorak, and Soichiro Hirai. He's only ever lost to a fighter named Sean Gauchi, and his total record is 12 wins and 1 loss. Now, out of his 12 wins, 2 of them were KO/TKOs, 6 were submissions, and 4 were decision victories, which also gives him a 67% finish rate. Out of his 1 loss, that was a decision loss. He also has 5 first-round finishes, recently winning all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he's currently on an 11-fight win streak, which is pretty impressive. His most recent win was just recent, back in March 2nd, 2024. His most recent loss was back in September 1st, 2017, so that was 7 years ago. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics-based research and fight film study observation as well. 1 out of 7 of my prediction models lean towards Alexander Pantoja, and 6 lean towards Steve Erceg. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 51.5% probability for Steve Erceg. However, I'm going to go opposite of the prediction models here and give Alexander Pantoja a 60.6% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Alexander Pantoja has better experience than Steve Erceg. Statistically, he also has a slightly better striking accuracy, he lands a little bit more takedowns on average, and he has an 18% higher takedown accuracy as well, and he lands ever so slightly more submissions on average. Let me be honest with you all, Pantoja is absolutely underrated and he just doesn't get enough credit. His victories against Brandon Royval, both of them, and his victory against Brandon Moreno speak volumes. Respectfully, who has Steve Erceg fought? I mean, sure, you could say he's defeated Matt Schnell and Alessandro Costa, but these two fighters aren't on the same level. Pantoja is coming off of 5 wins, and he's won 11 of his 14 UFC fights. He's won 84% of his total fights. He's finished 18 of his 27 wins, 8 by KO/TKO, and 10 by submission. And honestly, the guy just looks better in every single fight that he fights in. He's won a majority of his fights in the 3rd round and a lot in the 1st round too. He's versatile, and he can get it done pretty much anywhere in the octagon in any way that he wants. His last loss was all the way back in 2020, and he's recently won a few months ago. Momentum is truly on his side, and I think this will be a successful title defense for Pantoja. He'll either get the decision here, or he'll be able to leverage his grappling to eventually get Erceg to the ground and find an opening for a submission opportunity. I do respect Steve Erceg though, don't get me wrong. He's young, he has a size advantage, he has good striking ability, he's on an impressive 11-fight win streak. Maybe he could get it done with a Rocky-style story, but it should be Pantoja if we're talking logic here, so I do believe he's going to win this fight. And with that, those are all of the fights for UFC 301, Pantoja versus Erceg. I hope you all enjoyed and that your bets hit this weekend. Thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe, as it'll help keep me motivated in creating these videos. Running this data and analysis and prediction models and charts and graphs takes hours every single day and week, so I'd really appreciate the support. Please also check out that Patreon if you'd like to support me through there. There's a $5 and $10 monthly option if you want to throw a little help and appreciation my way through that. Definitely not required, but again, I would really appreciate that. See you all in the next one, and thank you all for watching.